I'll now take the sedient for this special meeting of South Lanarkshire Council held on the 22nd of February 2023. I can see we have Councillor Allison present, Councillor Anderson, Councillor Barker, Councillor Bradley, Councillor Brogan, Councillor Brown, Councillor Archie Buchanan, Councillor Matthew Buchanan, Councillor Kalikis, Councillor Carmichael, Councillor Chalmers, Councillor Clark, Councillor Convery, the Provost. I'm just going to check whether we have Councillor Corbett. Thank you. We have Councillor Cowan, Councillor Cowie, Councillor Devlin, Councillor Dewar, Councillor Donnelly, Councillor Fagan, Councillor Faulkner, Councillor Ferguson. I'm going to check regarding Councillor Ferguson Miller. I understand she was having problems. Okay, thank you, Councillor Horsham. We have Councillor Frame, Councillor Fulton, Councillor Gowland, Councillor Gray, Councillor Hamilton, Councillor Handywood, Councillor Horn, Councillor Horsham, Councillor Hose, Councillor Johnson-Dempsey, Councillor Keat, Councillor Kerr, Councillor Lambie, Councillor Lennon, Councillor Lockhart, Councillor Logan, Councillor Loudon, Councillor Hugh MacDonald, Councillor Marsh. I'll just check for Councillor McAdams. Thank you. We have Councillor McCallan, Councillor McClymont, Councillor McCreary, Councillor Leslie MacDonald, Councillor McDougall, Councillor McGeever, Councillor McLachlan, Councillor Nelson, Councillor Nugent, Councillor Ray, Councillor Razak, Councillor Robb, Councillor Ross, Councillor Dr Ali Salamati, Councillor Scott. I'll just check if we have Councillor Shearer. Yeah, we have Councillor Shearer remotely. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Toner, Councillor Walker and Councillor Watson. Can I just double check, do we have Councillor Ferguson Miller yet? No. Okay, so we'll look out for her joining the meeting. Thank you. I'll now hand you back to the Provost.
Okay, good. I'm going to invite Geraldine McCann to remind members on restrictions for voting. Geraldine.
Thank you, Provost. I would remind members of the restrictions on voting in setting the level of council tax. Any member present who has at least 2 months in arrears with payment of council tax or who has outstanding bills for community charge or poll tax must disclose this fact as soon as practicable after the start of the meeting and refrain from voting on the proposal for setting the level of council tax.
Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. I'll move on now to item 2 in the agenda, the overall position of the revenue budget and level of local taxation for 23-24, pages 3 to 30 in your papers. Could I invite Paul Manning to speak to this, please?
Right. Thanks, Provost, and good morning, members. So this is, as the Provost said, the overall position of the revenue budget and level of council tax for 2023-24. It is a long paper. It does 3 main things. So it revises the budget gap from the figure that was given to the council on the 18th of January. It then presents options to address that revised budget gap. And then finally, it presents the key figures in the budget, and those are towards the rear of the document and in the appendices. So the paper under background begins by looking at the journey that we've been on with this budget, and I've made the point before that this has been a different budget to that in previous years. It's been exceptional, and part of the reason for that, a big part of the reason, is the exceptional inflationary pressure that's been presented to the council across the past year. So consequently, we've reported more often on the budget than we have in previous years, and that started in June last year with a report to this council's first meeting. And that's recognised at the foot of the first page, where it talks about that initial budget gap of nearly £32.5 million. So over subsequent reports, we have worked away at that. And at the last council meeting on the 18th of January, there was a paper which was presented which revised the budget gap to £16.318 million. So that's the most recent picture that you've got. So coming back to the paper that we've got today, it does two things. It updates on that budget gap position, and then it presents you with options that could be used to bridge the remaining gap. So Section 4 picks up that update to the 2023-24 revenue budget strategy. So this is about the budget gap. And that comes together on the table that you can see midway down page 5 of the paper at 4.7, table 1. And I'll just go through the main elements that are appearing in that table 1. So we've got covered at 4.2, it refers to funding for teachers' pay award. And you can see in paragraphs 4.2 and 4.3, there's content there about information that we got which effectively updated the budget settlement towards the end of January. And what it picks up at 4.3 is the fact that the Scottish Government notified COSLA at the end of January that £32.8 million, that's a national figure, and that's funding for the 21-22 teachers' pay, which had been removed from settlement figures, was now being reinstated by the government into the 2023-24 settlement. So the rest of sections 4.3 and 4.4 pick that up and come to the point which is there in bold at the end of 4.4. The impact of that is that we can reduce the budget gap in 23-24 by £1.8 million. Now 4.5 and 4.6 pick up the consequences of the decision that you took at the last council, which was to implement that service concession guidance. So that was approved on the 18th of January. And what we're doing here is bringing in part of the retrospective benefit which arose as a consequence of that. So one of the recommendations here is that members approve the use of £5.7 million of that retrospective benefit, and that's to pay for 2022-23 pay award in 2023-24. Now that can improve the budget gap position by £5.7 million. So those things are summarised in that table that you can see at 4.7. That's midway down page 5. And it takes that budget gap from the £16.3 million that was reported in January to the £8.818 million, which is the basis of today's paper. So that's the revised figure that we'll work on in the remainder of this paper. The paper at the beginning of page 6 also talks about an update to the local government settlement 2023-24. So this was written obviously in advance. The papers are distributed in advance. And we noted that there may still be changes to the circular for a couple of different reasons. Now, I'm aware of the update that was provided by the Deputy First Minister, Mr Swinney, in Parliament yesterday. And I did respond to a question yesterday evening around this, which I did circulate to all group leaders. So while the statement in Parliament refers to additional funding to local government, given the fact that the money has been passed over specifically for pay, and given the obvious level of uncertainty around a pay settlement, I can't at present identify an amount from that announcement as a contribution that I could give to you today to assist in the Council's budget position. But we'll continue to monitor that and feedback over the coming weeks and months. Section 5 looks at the options to address that remaining budget gap of £8.8 million. And you can see picked out in bold there two things: increasing the level of council tax or approving savings proposals from the package in Appendix 1, which is included at the rear of the document. So a combination of those things could deal with that remaining budget gap. So each of those is taken in turn. So 5.2 picks up council tax, and it's a similar position, a similar approach to the one that I gave you when we presented the paper on the 18th of January. In arriving at the restated budget gap figure, just remember no account has been taken of any increase in council tax. And what Table 2 in the paper, and that's shown at the top of page 7, shows is the impact of a range of council tax increases that could be used to reduce the budget gap. Now, that's the same approach that we took when we brought you the paper on the 18th of January. At this stage, no increase in council tax is reflected within the figures in this report. So at 5.8, the paper then turns to savings proposals. And again, per the approach in the January report, these are included in Appendix 1, and they focus on two groups of savings. There's savings from reviews and there's savings in relation to budget flexibilities. So 5.9 summarises the background and the content in terms of things arising from reviews, and then 5.10 looks at the background to the budget flexibility savings. So that was about flexibility which had been sought from the Scottish Government through COSLA. And then at 5.11, it covers the flexibility which was extended through a letter from the Deputy First Minister back in November. And at 5.11, I'll just focus on this part for a second. The letter said that it's for individual councils as democratically elected bodies to consider the needs of their communities with a focus on the most vulnerable, their legal obligations and the totality of resource funding available to them, and then to take the decisions necessary to operate as effectively as possible within the context. So the remainder of Section 5 does cover further dialogue which is taking place around this with the Scottish Government, and you will note, given the extent of the coverage, that further dialogue has most notably been around teacher numbers, and you can see that covered in Section 5.14 and 5.15. Now, if I come back to the point I made a second ago, and again this is summarised at Section 6, on the achievement of a balanced budget, there are those options to increase the level of council tax or to approve savings proposals. And as I mentioned a second ago, the paper, as I'm presenting it, doesn't assume a council tax increase. Section 7 also covers retrospective benefit arising from the application of service concessions. So this is the thing we went through at length at the meeting on the 18th of January. And it was covered thoroughly in that paper, and it was also covered in previous reports. Now, again, per that paper on the 18th of January, and this is covered at the end of Section 7.2, we go through in 7.2 the potential use of that retrospective benefit that we've mapped out across a period of years. But again, I make the point at the end of 7.2, the use of the retrospective benefit to fund the implications of the 2022-23 pay award and to fund budget strategies moving forward would leave an amount of £10 million unallocated. I do make the point at 7.3, and noting that unallocated sum, members, I would ask, give consideration to the current unprecedented inflationary pressures affecting the council. A prudent approach would leave an element of this amount unallocated to address budget pressures which are likely to arise. So what I'm reminding you of is the climate that we're in. Now, what Section 8 does from this point onward, and this is a third of the way down page 9, is the third part of what I spoke about at the beginning of the paper. This is the numeric part of the paper. So it becomes quite technical. It gives figures like net expenditure. It shows the amount to be met from council tax and the amount that would be drawn from reserves. The figures assume £8.8 million gap, which is, remember, our revised savings gap would be closed by savings. It doesn't assume an increase in council tax. The one other point I'd draw your attention to in putting the paper in front of you today is Section 10, and that's about future years. So Section 10 covers the position beyond 2023-24. There is an appendix in there, Appendix 4, which includes the impact of solutions that we take which are temporary in nature and which require to be reinstated in future years. And it also gives budget gaps that I'm projecting at the moment for years 24-25 and 25-26. And we need to be mindful of those and decisions that are being taken. Provost, if I can go back to the recommendations at the beginning of the paper, you'll note there are a number of items for approval in there, covering items from service concession, covering reinstatement of that £1.8 million, covering the money to be used from reserves. Recommendation 5 asks that the level of council tax and the amount of savings to be used to balance the 2023-24 budget be considered. And it then goes on to note the unallocated amounts left from the service concession money and that reference to the £10 million figure. So that's the paper, Provost, as I'm putting it in front of you this morning, and I'm obviously happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Now, I'm aware that you've been kept abreast of the developments that Paul's spoken about over the last period of time, and you've had an opportunity to ask questions. We've all received many answers on by email out to everyone, sharing what those questions were. So given that, and given the briefings we've had both this morning and previously, are there any final questions for the officers regarding the paper that Paul has presented? Okay, we're happy to move on from there. Just before we move on to the next section, it was somewhat remiss of me not to welcome Councillor John Ross back to his work this morning. He's online for the meeting and he is returned after a long period of illness. And we're delighted, John, that you're able to join the meeting this morning, and wish you a speedy onward recovery. So thank you for that. Okay. Now, I'm aware that there are 2 amendments to the paper that Paul has presented, and the first amendment is by Councillor Fagan, and the second amendment is by Councillor Ross. So I'm going to ask both Councillor Fagan and Councillor Ross to provide their amendments to the clerk, preferably in email and hard copy format, to allow them to be circulated around everyone. Now, I'll give the clerks a few minutes to do this, and we'll have a short adjournment of 10 minutes to allow people to read the papers that are coming before them. So you should get your paper within the next 5 minutes. So if we could be back, if you're leaving the room or staying where you are, we should resume at 25 to 11. Thank you. Okay, folks, we'll resume the meeting. Susan is just going to check that everyone who was here is still here, particularly those that were online. We'll just give Susan a minute or two to do that. We're waiting, just Councillor Mars seems to have left her screen for a few moments. Okay, that's it. Right, I'm going to invite Councillor Fagan as Leader of the Council to present his amendment.
Thank you, Provost. When this administration took office in May, we said we'd bring new leadership to South Lanarkshire Council. And in the months that followed, we worked across party lines to put new ideas into action. The Fair Tax Charter, writing off £100,000 of school meal debt, the real nappy incentive, the right of workers to disconnect, day services remobilised, a new litter strategy, youth strategy, a programme of 1,300 more council homes, paternity leave for our workforce doubled, and a new deal for employees, and much, much more. And all of it was achieved within existing spending plans. Today we ask the Council to approve new plans, and I want to thank all those who contributed to that process, the Budget Working Group, our officials, our councillors, and the public who responded to our consultation. After more than a decade of council funding cuts, we cannot meet every need or match every aspiration, but I believe the decisions we are asking the Council to make today are the right ones for these tough times. Once the position on fiscal flexibilities has been established and prudent use of service concession benefit is approved, this Council faces a residual funding gap of £8.8 million. To close that gap, we will exercise fiscal flexibilities in planning and building fees and social work, raise cremation charges from the lowest in Scotland towards the average, increase school meal charges at half the rate proposed initially, and divert £500,000 in council tax receipts paid by the owners of second homes from the HRA to the general fund. And to ensure there is no detriment to our housing investment plans, we are authorising today an HRA loan fund review. Those measures save £1.95 million without parking charges at country parks or abolishing the free special uplifts or using any of the £8.7 million in education flexibilities government offered to councils in lieu of a budget increase. Once savings are agreed, there is still a residual budget gap to close, and in the absence of a better budget from the Scottish Government, council tax will have to rise. We propose to increase council tax by 5.5%, half the rate of inflation, and while most of that increase will close the residual budget gap, over £1 million will fund borrowing to invest in our leisure and cultural buildings. Our £13 million transformation fund will start to tackle a legacy of underinvestment. We will spend to save and invest in the transition to a modern, greener, fit-for-purpose estate. Our administration promised to back our council workers with a £3 million Frontline First today. Today I'm presenting plans for a £3.5 million Frontline First fund to create high-impact environmental squads to clean up our communities, tackle graffiti and fly tipping, improve the maintenance of our edging and hedgerows and trees and weeds and environments, take forward safe routes for communities and invest in the vehicles and machinery and equipment our frontline workers need. The budget also creates a new preschool clothing grant, extending £130 school clothing grant payments to the early years, helping 3 and 4-year-olds and enhancing our £90 million plus cost of living support package. The budget also reinstates £200,000 of investment in community-led activities, makes £1.5 million in transitional support available for South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture, and honours a cross-party commitment to give £15,000 to the Turkey-Syria earthquake appeal. In our motion today, we ask the Council to think of future budgets too, and how to realise our vision of a council that transitions to net zero while generating municipal income, and we will do that through our budget sounding board. We ask the Council to fight back against centralisation and underfunding, take on the capital challenges that were set out starkly last month, and take forward plans for our new leisure centres, starting with Lark Hall. And this budget also asks the Executive Committee to consider what a new relationship with South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture can achieve and what it means for our services. Every pound we have available to spend on local services is being devalued by rampant inflation. Food, fuel bills and construction costs are all massively up, and that has a crippling effect on our finances. Our local residents are facing many similar pressures on their household bills, and that's why we've done everything we can to help those who are most vulnerable during the cost of living crisis. We will continue to do that in the years ahead, and we'll also continue to fight relentlessly for fair funding for our communities. We have more than our fair share of ambition for South Lanarkshire. It's time we had our fair share of public spending too. The fight goes on, but the budget must be passed today. And this budget is the budget to put new ideas into action and invest wisely in the future of South Lanarkshire. Thank you.
I understand Councillor Brown is going to second that, and can I invite Councillor Brown to speak, please?
Provost, thank you very much. I want to second the budget motion by the Leader of the Administration. It's firmly based on the partnership programme of our administration, agreed between Liberal Democrats, Labour and Independents. But I do want to recognise, as Joe has done, colleagues across the Chamber who contributed professionally and realistically to the development of the budget. And I'd also like to thank FMA Paul Manning and his team for all the work they've done in preparing the budget papers, answering the queries. It's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, isn't it, with 1,000 pieces, with the difference that the pieces are made of jelly and they keep moving about. I want to make some comments from a Liberal Democrat perspective on the budget motion. Firstly, as the Leader has said, there's a strong and proper focus on frontline services, brightening up South Lanarkshire, more attention to keeping drains clear, recognising the reduced cleaning frequency in recent years needs to be reviewed. More manual removal of pavement weeds, reducing the use of glyphosate weed killer and helping biodiversity, taking forward our pedestrian safe routes with demonstrator projects to start the ball rolling. Secondly, though, the Leisure Trust faces a severe crisis, made worse by escalating energy costs in swimming pools and other facilities. Liberal Democrats were keen to get into the partnership agreement and now into the budget a capital change fund to allow investment in the Leisure Trust estate, and the administration have also provided a modest supplement to the money we pay the Trust to enable them to work with communities to adapt their provisions to better fit real local needs within the financial constraints they face. A future for the Leisure Trust, not a one-year sticking plaster solution. Thirdly, the investment in school clothing grants for 3 and 4-year-olds is a targeted investment to help families at the key nursery stage, a modest but worthwhile improvement in these difficult times, and again, as has been said, with a community council tax increase at around half the inflation rate. Fourthly, the budget inevitably focuses on changes from last year, but it also entrenches the huge volume of work done by our staff in all the resources to support South Lanarkshire people and deliver the policies of the Council. For example, in Communities and Enterprise, we've got a sharpened focus on economic revival, on supporting tourism, food industries, innovative engineering companies and the rural economy, laying groundwork for a more prosperous future for all our communities. A word on service concessions, if I may. They're a device allowed to us by the Scottish Government to get better use of our money belonging to the Council and to local people, not extra money provided by government generosity. And I believe it's an absolute scandal that we should be required to use the service concessions primarily to fill our budget gap. That money is our citizens' money. It should be available to invest in our facilities, improving the leisure centres and swimming pools, modernising the way we heat, light and conserve our buildings to produce long-term savings, help meeting our net zero commitments, offering people in difficult times affordable access to top-quality active living and leisure activities. Now, this year's budget has been particularly difficult because of the backdrop of the energy crisis, the cost of living, the soaring inflation. The signs are that that will decline to a more modest level by the time of next year's budget, but of course it leaves in its wake a 10% decrease in the people's real income, not least those on poverty line incomes. And in those circumstances, who would have thought that the Scottish Government would regard it as sensible or fair to continue to cut council budgets in real terms whilst in receipt of increased funding from Westminster? If you listen to Scottish ministers, you'd think that extraordinary largesse was flowing into councils. In fact, it is a magician's act. Whoosh, a wave of the wand, an announcement of £570 million extra for local services with the Scottish Government transmutes like fairy gold into a mere 38 million, and a real terms cut. Another whoosh, and the real terms increase of 8.3% over the last 10 years in the Scottish Government's revenue becomes a 4.3% real terms cut for councils. That's Spice figures and the Auditor General's figures. So I believe that this council today should say to the Scottish Government, you're about to have a new leader and the opportunity of a change of direction. Govern in the interest of Scotland. Square two circles at once. Stop the centralising power grab that's the National Care Service bill. Save the £1 billion you're proposing to spend on bureaucracy and allocate it to the councils to use on investing in care services and helping councils support local people through good quality and properly funded facilities. Notwithstanding the pressures and the difficulties and the financial issues, this is a good, forward-looking budget from a progressive council administration. We need to make every penny of it count, and I urge the council to adopt it and support it overwhelmingly. Thank you very much, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Geraldine.
Just one point in the amendment, Provost. The last proposal, which is a £15,000 donation to the Disasters Emergency Committee. The Council is unable to fund any organisation working abroad. However, it can fund an organisation working within the UK. So therefore, I would suggest that we fund the Red Cross, for example, because the Red Cross also work abroad, but then they could use the funds within the UK, and it allows them to put more money abroad in their general appeals.
Okay, I'm going to move to Councillor Ross now to present our second amendment this morning. Thank you, Councillor Ross. Sorry, we've got an issue with hearing you. We're not hearing you, Councillor Ross. Okay. No. Still no volume. We need to hear him in here. Are there any suggestions from IT how we can Councillor Ross, it might be advisable to log out and log back in again. We'll pause for a few minutes to allow you to do that, if you can hear us. Councillor Salamati, would you mind speaking to see whether it's an isolated problem or one that you might be having as well?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's just Councillor Ross. We have to. Councillor Ross, are you able to?
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Provis?
thank you. Well done. Okay, Councillor Ross, would you like to present the amendment for the?
Yeah, before I do that, Provis, can I thank you for your kind words at the beginning of the meeting, and also thank those who over the last 7 months have inquired after my health. It's so good to be back and in the thick of it. Well, not sure if it's good to be in the thick of it. I'll tell you in about a half an hour's time whether that's true or not. It's a privilege again for me to be presenting a balanced budget on behalf of the SNP group, the largest single political group in council. In previous years as a minority administration, we were happy to be part of the cross-party budget working group to produce a balanced budget that most political parties could live with. The Labour group chose on most occasions not to participate in those discussions and produced their own budget. We declined to take part this year for very good reasons. Last May's election saw us returned as the largest party in council, but Labour, the Independents and the Liberals all voted together with support from the Tories to deny South Lanarkshire residents their democratic choice. They have since demonstrated that they will blatantly make decisions down constitutional lines, giving us no confidence that our views would be given due consideration, so we withdrew from the cross-party budget group. As the largest party in council, we felt it our duty to those who voted for us last May to produce a budget amendment that was in keeping with our principles and the manifesto we were elected on. Our budget amendment proposals prioritise safeguarding our communities in the face of the continuing cost of living crisis, whilst protecting our frontline services. When you're faced with an unprecedented cost of living crisis and an extremely tight budget situation, what should be your role in opposition? Should it be like Labour's lead with the Scottish Parliament's budget, repeatedly failing to bring any alternative working suggestions to the table? Or should it be like the Labour group's approach in Glasgow City, leaving the chamber to pose for photographs outside and failing to provide any alternatives and completely neglecting their elected duties? In COSLA, SNP leaders have been treading an unwavering path to campaign with cross-party colleagues for fair and sustainable settlements for local government. Here today we have choices to make and the opportunity to fully consider and act upon the views our communities have expressed. We have the chance to protect them from high council taxes, to protect frontline services, to avoid unnecessary cuts, and to invest in transformational service change for the future. It's a bold move on our part, but it's possible and necessary. When people are in crisis in our communities, as they are right now, this is not the time to fill our piggy banks for a rainy day. This is a rainy day. Our budget amendment allows the opportunity to continue the previous SNP administration's steps towards a transformational change in our approach delivering council services with communities and not for communities. Nobody foresaw the pandemic and the challenges it would bring, but our communities, volunteers and employees surpassed any expectations that we could have held for them with their continued resilience, ambition and commitment. Now, with the first budget of a new term, we need to repay that debt. Thanks to decisions taken by the previous SNP administration on council budget strategy and through the hard work of our officers, we are reviewing working practices, plus a range of fiscal flexibilities fought for by myself and other leaders at COSLA. South Lanarkshire finds itself in a much better position than many other local authorities. Our radical budget amendment proposals not only protect vital council services, but outline a number of new funding investments to further strengthen our communities, while still maintaining what we think will be the lowest council tax on mainland Scotland. I'll return to those new funding investments in a moment, but first I would like to acknowledge those who have helped make it possible. Once again, like others, I'd like to thank Paul Manning and his finance department for all their help and assistance in producing this budget, and also all the members of the corporate management team who have worked so hard throughout the year to reduce the budget gap. Everybody should have a copy of our budget amendment, so I'll start with the first item, council tax. Last year, the SNP administration agreed a council tax of 2.5%. Today, our balanced budget includes still a low amount of 3.5% increase. And this small increase allows us to preserve services, unlike other groups, while still managing to invest in new funding for our communities, and if accepted, will still see us maintain our position as having the lowest council tax on mainland Scotland. A lower council tax increase, of course, has an impact on the funding available for new investments. It's a balancing act, but we have taken on board the views expressed by our residents in the many public consultations we have carried out. And we're delighted that even after we have been offered some relief on council tax, we still have a surplus in the non-recurring additional funds available to us to make some important investments. I would like to thank everyone who took part in these consultations. Their views are really important to us. We listened and they have helped us shape our budget proposals for the coming year. Here's what our budget proposals would deliver. Community first investments. On clothing grants, we will scope out and pilot free breakfast provision in secondary schools in partnership with young people and third sector groups with an investment of 100k. We will bring free school meal entitlement into line with the school clothing grant in P6 and P7 in secondary schools, including school holiday payments for all primary and secondary pupils entitled to school clothing grants, with a further investment of 1.55 million. School gardening initiatives. We will invest 50k to encourage school gardening initiatives with links to the food growing network to encourage children and young people to grow and learn about food and care for local ecologies. Supporting people with the cost of living. We will invest to support our communities through the cost of living crisis by investing £1 million in a financial wellbeing support fund, extending the scheme introduced in our 2022-23 budget, designed to help specifically support households experiencing financial hardship. We will support our communities' access to facilities, reinstating the investment commitment in the 22-23 budget of 110k to employ a community development worker for 2 years to support management committees, build capacity, develop local plans and access external funding sources. We will also invest 150k to provide a grant-based fund for community hall management committees to improve facilities such as access to buildings, toilets, kitchens and address any safety concerns. We will establish a new winter festival fund of 150k to ensure all communities can plan, organise and celebrate events to bring communities of place and interest together. This will lead to greater equity than existing historical fund arrangements across geographical areas and will better reflect the multicultural nature of our communities. To facilitate transition to a new approach, the funding for current arrangements will be continued in 23-24. We will support community-based arts, leisure and culture. We will ensure the sustainability of our local libraries, leisure and cultural facilities and access to health and wellbeing provision with an investment of £2 million. We will continue to support community priorities which have been identified through community-led engagement and consultative processes. We will invest £200,000 to support a place-based participatory budgeting programme to support the delivery of priorities in neighbourhood planning areas. And we will invest £150,000 to continue the grant scheme which all of our other communities can access, recognising that across South Lanarkshire, many communities have come together to identify their own priorities. We will support our shared commitment to the environment and our infrastructure, investing a further £150 to extend the Climate Emergency Fund to investigate energy savings, generating opportunities or service changes in order to help meet net zero ambitions and save on energy costs. Pavements and footpaths. To recognise the very successful PB exercise last year and recognise community concerns on this issue, we will invest £1.5 million to improve pavements and footpaths, continuing to use a participatory budgeting approach. And we will support the work of our volunteer organisations by giving them £120,000 payment, which recognises the crucial role they play in our communities by providing a 5% increase in grant payments. Crucially, we will invest to support transformational change in council services of £124,000. It was recognised in the budget strategy in June 2021 that fundamental transformation would be required to not only ensure sustainability of services, but also to meet the expressed need of our communities. And while the governance of this work may be provided by a cross-party working group of senior elected members, we need community leadership and participation to provide ideas, solutions and advice. The approach taken to developing the new community and council plans provide the basis for a deeper and more deliberate discussion on what our council should look like in 2027. We would thus propose a 2-year programme of intense and deliberate discussion using a citizens' assembly approach supported, as I said, by an investment of £120,000. As part of this transformation, we recognise the importance of climate change impact assessments in ongoing and future budget. And as a public body, we have annual duties to report to the Scottish Government to explain how spending plans and use of our resources are aligned to emission targets. And as part of the council budget setting process and medium-term financial planning, councillors and the public should understand the climate impact of spending proposals. We therefore request that going forward, officers provide the high-level guidance political groups need to complete a climate impact assessment of budget proposals as an integral part of the usual process, so that all future budget motions include an accompanying statement on climate impact. Our budget amendment offers a multi-million pound programme of investment of over £7.3 million. These investments, we feel, represent our absolute commitment to the people of South Lanarkshire to invest in their future, to secure services and support communities through these most difficult of times. I firmly believe that the budget proposals our group have agreed and I present to you today, they represent the best use of our council finances, and on behalf of our citizens, I commend them to council. Thanks very much, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. I understand Councillor Chalmers is seconding the amendment. Do you wish to speak?
Second the amendment, Provost. Thank you.
Thank you. now going to move on to give colleagues an opportunity to discuss and debate the amendments that are before us. And I'm going to ask Councillor Allison for his contribution from the Conservative group.
Thank you very much, Provost. You know, it's the hope that kills you in the end. Yesterday we all got excited about £100 million, suddenly to find out it was all this usual smoking mirrors. And it was simply money that had already been, can I say, promised towards the teachers' pay, as we were informed earlier. So once again, Scottish Government has chosen not to support their constituents, and this is at particularly a time they needed help most. The largest settlement ever for Scottish Government, what does that result in? It's up over 4%, again, has already been said. What happens to our budget? It's been cut by Scottish Government by around 4% over the same period. Independent analysts highlighting that £2 billion went unspent. Never mind the £200 million on ferries that haven't sailed, or the £20 million for a never-endum. Obviously, there's plenty of money available to everybody other than their support of councils. We are pleased to say that every single council leader in Scotland supported the COSLA position in that they were looking for greater funding for councils, and that has, our underfunded councils, that has to be welcomed. But we have to deal with the situation as it is. The concessions we are using mean that we will be paying for services used next year for around 20 years. Flexibilities were offered by Scottish Government, then withdrawn. In the end, to balance the budget, we would agree to a 5.5% rise in council tax. This is very much in line with every other administration in Scotland, regardless of political party. Only oppositions who have no chance of implementing anything are suggesting any less. I have to admit, though, it is a great deal higher than we would like, and we believe, but we believe in supporting this position to get an agreement on a balanced budget. I note the SNP amendment, and it shows how easy it is to promise things when you won't have the opportunity ever to implement them. No SNP administration, as I've said, has even suggested a council tax rise as low as this. And it's so different when you're in administration. Not that we are. They also proposed to... Taking more out of reserves, as that amendment suggests, will only make the hole we have to fill next year even deeper. And we have been informed quite regularly, even when the SNP were in the working group, how big that will be. And I think making it deeper today would exactly be the wrong way forward. It still leaves us with the lowest council tax in mainland Scotland, and within it we have a transformation fund being created that will help very much our rundown facilities. And we can support that as they have been neglected for far too long. If Scottish Government do not start and properly fund councils, we'll be in a very difficult position next year. So we need to make use of the time the concessions have given us and decide what services the council can afford to provide. This Conservative group will continue to represent those who have elected us and work for the benefit of all our constituents. We will continue to do so no matter who is in administration, to get budgets that are balanced and help all sectors of our communities to the best we can. And we will be voting accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. I should have asked, are there any further amendments? No. Okay, I'm going to step out of my role as Provost for a few minutes and make a short statement on behalf of the independent group. Colleagues, I don't need to tell any of you that the budget being considered by the Council today has been drawn up against a backdrop of the most difficult financial circumstances any of us have ever faced. The fiscal environment that we are meeting in to agree our financial plans for 23-24 is, in a word, horrendous. I don't intend to go over the reasons for this yet again. The Council leader has already spelled this out in some detail. But it is really important that the constituents we serve understand why some tough decisions have to be taken here today. So I want to reinforce two key messages. First and fundamentally, this Council and all Scottish local authorities are being woefully underfunded by the Scottish Government, and this has been the case for at least a decade. This year, COSLA said councils needed £1 billion added to their grants just to stand still. That would equate to around 60 million more for South Lanarkshire. Instead, although the Scottish Government tried to dress it up otherwise, councils got just 71 million more in real terms in their initial settlement. Yesterday, the Acting Finance Secretary, wearing a black jersey with stripes on it, was shamed into giving an extra 100 million in council funding to get his budget passed. But even if South Lanarkshire gets the expected additional 6 million promised, that would still leave us with about 50 million less than COSLA said we need. And that's after years of successive real term cuts. As you'll remember, the Accounts Commission last year said councils had seen their grants fall by 9.6% since 2013-14. A conservative estimate would suggest South Lanarkshire has had to find more than £150 million in savings over that period. So we are already battling to provide good quality frontline services with about 80 pence to spend for every pound we used to have. Which brings me to my second point about the financial reality we are in. As if it was not hard enough to balance our budget, the reduced funding we are getting is worth less and less in a world where inflation recently peaked at more than 11%. We all hope that figure will come down this year, but the brutal fact is that the situation is actually even worse. Because the increase in prices of the basic commodities we need to deliver our key services is higher, this includes food for our school pupils and our care home residents and construction materials for road repairs and new council homes. Our utility bills alone have doubled. I am sorry to have to relay these depressing facts, but as I said before, it is important we are honest with local residents and ensure they know why we have had to make some difficult decisions. This was my 4th year as chair of the Council's cross-party working group, and I can confirm that I am definitely exhausted yet again. This was the hardest year yet. On a more positive note, there was general agreement within the group, which gave us a good start to work together towards the best possible solution. I want to thank the officers, as my colleagues have done, across the Council who worked hard to prepare options for us and who kept us right as what was a very fluid situation kept changing. Thanks to Paul Manning and his finance team in particular, but to everyone who was involved from all departments across the Council. I want to thank the political groups and their leaders for the enormous efforts put in at the working group. We may be political opponents, but we were united in one clear aim, to do the best we could for our constituents, and that passion often came through in debates. Labour, the Conservatives, the Lib Dems and the independent councillors stuck with the effort at reaching a consensus to the very end. And you all deserve praise for delivering a balanced budget that is by no means perfect, but which protects key frontline services. I regret that the SNP did not stay the course and maintain that consensus. But even though I am speaking now as leader of the independent group rather than as provost, I am not going to criticise them for what was at the end of the day a political decision that they were entitled to take. To sum up, I repeat, the budget before us today is imperfect. None of us came into local politics to put up council tax or increase other charges. We certainly never wanted to be forced to consider going backwards in terms of the fantastic range and quality of services we have built up over the years. But as I said before, that is the position we find ourselves in due to a combination of inadequate government funding and the wider economic problems facing the country as a whole. Our shared goal was to do everything we could to protect the key frontline services people rely on. Let's be under no illusion, colleagues, the situation is unlikely to change any time soon. So we face more tough decisions in the years to come and intend to start working towards next year almost immediately after this year's budget has been agreed. I'd urge every member and every political group here to do everything they can to continue to lobby the Scottish Government for a fairer settlement next year and the years after. And I urge every political group to stick with the Budget Working Group. We have agreed it will now be a standing body with regular meetings as we continue this important work. So, colleagues, once again, thank you all for your efforts to help us to get to the position where we can present our balanced budget. It is imperfect and parts of it are hard for us to stomach, but I believe it is the best possible outcome for the Council and for our residents and constituents in South Lanarkshire. I commend the budget presented by the Leader of the Council. I'm now going to invite Susan. Sorry, Councillor Ross is wishing to speak, but I'd rather come to yourself. Do you wish to make any comment? Okay. Kirsten Robb, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Provost. Firstly, I'd like to thank the officers for their hard work in the budget process, answering many questions and offering advice. My first experience of budget time has been an interesting one, and believe I've had some positive impact now and will do into the future. When looking through this budget and savings proposals, three things were uppermost in my mind: protect the most vulnerable, address climate change, and spend to save, where investing now saves a lot more later. In terms of income generation, I identified and shared with leaders a small opportunity that could be usefully used to help save further money on council energy bills, which had a massive impact on our budget this year. There are other opportunities I also raised that will need more work, and I look forward to progressing these in 2023-24. These include putting more vacant and derelict land on the valuation roll, parking fines, renewables, non-domestic rates, school transport, and even use of teacher strike saving money and more. There's no doubt that council budgets are under huge strain, and it's incumbent on all politicians to be pushing national governments, Holyrood and Westminster, to use their powers to the greatest possible extent in order to deliver fairer funding. And we, as councillors, must do everything in our power to think differently, innovate and ensure spend is fully aligned to address the challenges we face. It's worth noting that the 23-24 Scottish Budget does include positive steps towards a more progressive taxation system, where the wealthiest are paying a bit more, their fair share, to help fund services. This has gone some way to improving the state of our finances, but we must go much, much further if we're to protect and properly fund local services. I congratulate the sterling efforts of all parties to put forward a budget, and I'm grateful for the engagement and taking on board issues I've raised. Whilst I agree with many of the initiatives in both amendments, I'm afraid I must abstain on this year's budget. There's simply not enough information to say hand on heart, particularly as Deputy Chair of the Climate Committee, that this budget aligns with the Council's own plan on climate or national targets to reduce road miles travelled. The continued commitments to City Deal Road expansion projects without preparing a climate impact assessment and mitigating any increased emissions are not yet something I can vote for. However, We can rectify this for next year's budget. I have suggested wording from a motion already passed and being brought in by another council to help examine the impact of spend on our climate commitments and identify ways to avoid or mitigate any increase in emissions. Like what's done for equality impacts now, proposals that may impact on climate would be subject to a more detailed assessment and that information given to councillors at budget time. I propose to bring this motion to a future meeting of the council for members' consideration. To conclude, I look forward to engaging fully in future budget processes and would certainly support constructive and genuine dialogue, bringing all parties and elected representatives from different levels together to address the issues we face. South Lanarkshire must have greater powers on income and decision making and do more on climate so it can be best for our current and future citizens.
Thank you, Councillor Rob. I'm now offering an opportunity for questions to be asked before I ask each of the groups to sum up the amendments they've put forward. Councillor John Ross, would you like to come in, please?
Can you hear me, Provost?
Can you hold it first, please, Councillor Ross? Councillor Clark has a point of order he wishes to raise.
Thanks, Provost. I'm sorry to interrupt my colleague, Councillor Ross, but we have been going for well over an hour. I think that's been an hour and 20 minutes now, so I think it would be wise to have at least a 5-minute break before we continue, as there's still a few people left to speak.
Councillor Clark, I would point out to you that we've had 2 recesses during that period of time. One was at least for 15 minutes, so that's important. However, I'm happy to give another 5-minute recess at this particular moment, just to comply with our commitment to our sign language people. So we'll have a recess now for 5 minutes. I'd ask you not to leave the chamber unless it's absolutely necessary. All right. I was just waiting, Councillor Convery. Sorry, we're holding for Councillor Convery. We've got everyone back online, so we're okay there. Okay, colleagues, Councillor Ross is waiting to speak, so I'll allow Councillor Ross to come in now.
Thanks very much, Provost. It was just in relation to some of the things that Councillor Allison, on behalf of the Conservative Party, has said. I just can't believe when he was talking about council tax and his agreement to the present level put forward by the administration. In the last 5 years, in all the cross-party budget working groups, the Conservative group have been looking at the lowest possible council tax from about 1%, and even at last year, we're willing to walk out the cross-party working group if we hadn't agreed to something round about 2.5%. All of these things just go to prove what I said at the beginning of the meeting, that we were right to withdraw, because it would appear that the Conservative group are willing to forgo all of their principles to make sure that a unionist agreed budget comes forward to this council. So I'm quite happy that we took the decision to withdraw. Also, there's been comments made by several people regarding the Scottish Government and funding for local authorities. As a leader myself in local authority, I think we should be provided with as much funding as possible. And I agree with the leaders at COSLA writing to the Scottish Government to try and obtain as much funding as possible. However, I think it should be noted that all of the other political groups find it very reluctant to actually send letters to the UK Government asking for a larger pot of money to be sent to the Scottish Government. So they're very easy to castigate the Scottish Government. But I would like to see them use that same enthusiasm to attack the UK Government so that we can get more funding here in Scotland. Thanks, Provost.
Sorry, I thought Ross was in front of me. Just a point for yourselves, maybe a question. What is the cost of administration? Well, down in SNP, Dumfries and Galloway at the moment, they're asking for a 6.5% rise in council tax compared to opposition here who are only looking for 3.5%. Perhaps it shows you just what the who's playing political games. Yeah, yeah.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Provost. It's not a surprise to see Labour clapping the Tories again. Labour, the Lib Dems and the Tories know that we are in a difficult financial climate due to war in Ukraine, Tory economic mismanagement, crashing the economy in record time, and a hard Brexit supported by both Labour and the Tories, and even the Lib Dems don't want to take us back into the EU. A hard Brexit imposed on us against our will. Brexit inflation has already increased the cost of living by £870 per year in the UK, with Brexit already costing our economy billions. The Scottish Parliament spends over £700 million a year mitigating Tory policies from Westminster, such as the bedroom tax and the benefit cap. The Scottish Government must balance its budget while also supporting core services and priorities and the continuing impact of the pandemic. If other parties are calling for an increase in funding, can they say what areas of the Scottish budget they would cut to fund this? Would it be education, health, police, all areas they also want to put more funding in, so where are they going to get the money for this? Key economic levers lie with the UK Government. The other parties agree that additional flexibility, such as borrowing powers, would allow the Scottish Government to mobilise and deploy funding in the most effective and efficient way to support our citizens. We are under financial pressure, but there are choices to be made, and the SNP are making the choices that put our residents first, protecting services while investing in communities and keeping council tax low instead of scaremongering. We are working hard to protect people in the cost of living crisis, and that shows in our budget. We know if Labour were in opposition, they would have abandoned their constituents and not even turned up, as we have seen in Glasgow. And I don't think the Lib Dems can lecture anyone on Scotland's priorities, considering their continued electoral failure and rejection by the Scottish people, who have instead returned SNP governments. And I'm sorry, the Tories are not focused on providing for South Lanarkshire. In the very first vote of this council, they admitted to vote in a nationalistic route and a unionist manner. And the only motion they have brought forward to date, I believe, is on flags. And to me, that doesn't reflect the community's priorities. So I'd encourage councillors to vote for the SNP amendment.
Colleagues, can I remind you of the 3-minute rule when you're contributing, please? Can I move on to Councillor Convery?
Chair. That's it. I'd like to get back to the day job, Chair, and that's about providing services to the people of this council. But I'm afraid, and it's good to see John back, healthy, but unfortunately, John, you've let the cat out the bag once again. Because if we go to number 6 in his amendment, it says the remaining £10 million of the unallocated, this is the service concession money, will just blow on the 1 year. And I find it a bit hypocritical, Chair, because all through the discussions last year, this year, right up to it, we congratulated Paul Manning and his team. And Paul, quite rightly, because he's paid the salary to do this, is to give us factual information. And it says in 7.3 here, in noting this unallocated sum, members should give consideration to the current unprecedented inflationary pressures affecting the council. A prudent approach would leave an element of this amount unallocated to address budget pressures, which are likely to arise in the coming years. Well, here we go. And again, John's highlighted it. John knows he's not going to be in power, and it's dead simple for the sidelines to throw bricks at other people. So I'm asking people, and I'm asking my colleagues in SNP, don't support John Ross's amendment, support the motion, because when we come back here next year, and Paul gives us a gloom and doom, because we're not going to get the money for the Scottish Government, because they have devolved taking money away. I came into this council in 1995, and since then we've lost £200 million in cuts. And the only government I've seen up at Holyrood's been an SNP government. So I'm going to finish in that. It's been a good debate so far, but let's get into the real world and let's stop playing party politics in here with the people that we represent. We're here to provide quality services for people. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Convery. Okay, I have 2 more speakers, and then I'll 3 more speakers, and then we'll move to the winding up comments from each group. So can we come to Gavin Keat?
Thank you very much, Provost. Councillor Ross spoke about a rainy day, and I think it's worth reminding him, and Councillor Clark for that matter, that their very own SNP government in Edinburgh have very much contributed to that rainy day. Since coming into government in 2007, they have squandered £3 billion of our public money. Whether that being 152 million on ferry contracts, 146 million on their 2 failed hospitals, 40 million on the malicious prosecution of Rangers, £9 million and unnecessary. They're laughing. This is their government, their cuts. This is the decisions we're making at the cost of their mismanagement and their cuts. The list is endless and the mismanagement is endless as well. So, Councillor Ross, I agree with you, it is a rainy day, but if your colleagues in Edinburgh continue with their mismanagement, their cuts, we better all get our brollies looked at.
Thank you, Councillor Keat. Can I have Councillor Mark McGeever?
Thanks very much, Provost. I'm looking for some clarification on a couple of points regarding the SNP amendment. So, firstly, what does it add to the funding gap for future financial years? And secondly, in the further investment section, are there proposals for things like free school meals extensions and breakfast funding? Are they one-off commitments, or has provision been made so that people can rely on these things for future years, like our administration's pre-school clothing grant and Frontline First Fund?
Someone from the SNP group wish to respond to that? Councillor Ross.
Yes, thanks very much. The 1.55 million is a one-off yearly, and we will look again, taking into consideration the Scottish Government's situation at that time and how we can progress that in future budgets. Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Razak.
I rise to support the motion. I've got just a couple of points and I'll be very, very brief. Firstly, in my own area, Blantyre, we have 3 halls out of 4 that are in need of repair. We've got leisure facilities that are run down, and this is throughout South Lanarkshire. And we've had no leadership for the last term for these repairs to be done. These repairs have been rumbling on for years. And now we need to gather money to pay for these repairs, because it's either that or we have facilities that are not fit for purpose. And now we're having to pay for the incompetence of the previous term. The second part to this is that we had the war in Ukraine, and the council quite rightly donated money towards Ukraine. We've had over 35,000 deaths in Syria and Turkey, yet the SNP haven't put any money towards that at all, which I think is shameful. And I finally would say that this idea of spending for today and ignoring tomorrow is not prudent. It's just bad management. Thank you.
Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Provost. I'd just like to pull up Councillor Morazak there. We actually had agreed with other leaders to put the £15,000 in for Ukraine. Unfortunately, it was missed off the budget. What we had agreed with other leaders and other groups, that this was a good thing to do. So, just like to explain that.
Councillor Razak.
Councillor Ross had the opportunity to bring that up when he spoke about his amendment. He didn't make any opportunity, neither did any of my colleagues across the other side. So I'm puzzled by the response, because if that's the case, then surely that should have been brought up.
Time to both sides of the room to share their thoughts and ask any questions, etc. I'm going to move now to ask the leaders of each group to sum up, and could I start with Councillor John Ross?
The arguments coming from a number of different areas. In relation to Councillor Keats, I myself could sit here and go on 100 things that the Scottish Government has done to help out the Scottish electorate on what's been put forward by the UK Government. I'm not going to sit here and do that. The budget that we've produced today has been declared balanced. It's achievable if only people were bold enough to take it into consideration. So as far as I'm concerned, we think it's the best choice of funding going forward for the next year. And as I said before, I commend it to Council.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. Councillor Fagan.
Thank you. And I just wanted to respond to some of the points that came out of the debate. Not every point, but could I say perhaps to Councillor Robb, when she indicated her abstention, the end of this process is usually a bit frantic, and she has made some very constructive suggestions, not all that we are able to reflect in our budget motion at this precise point in time, but there is the opportunity of the sounding board where I would be keen to continue the dialogue in that constructive spirit that Councillor Robb always approaches these debates in. And can I say in relation to Councillor Ross, perhaps a slightly less constructive spirit, first of all, it was remiss of me to say it's good to see him back, actually, and apologies for not indicating that earlier. It's good to see him back. And he talked a bit about the different approaches to the budget and who he was going to draw inspiration from. And he talked about Labour in the Scottish Parliament and Labour in Glasgow. And they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery because it appears that he has drawn inspiration from Labour in South Lanarkshire. And he's chosen to put forward his alternative budget motion. But I have to say it's a bit of a pale imitation. It's actually a bit of a knockoff, to be perfectly honest. It's a bit like when you see these brands, like, you know, Have a Break, Have a Cat Kit, or Pick Up a Pelican, or Louisiana Fried Chicken. But don't worry, I don't have any intention of giving up the day job. I'm going to be leading this council for the duration of the term, and we're going to lead it right. Well, I'm not going to criticise the SNP for putting forward a budget amendment. I've led the opposition in the council before, and it is legitimate for different parties to set out different approaches and then to allow the council democratically to decide among them. The public can judge why the SNP amendment sets out ambitions they did not have and did not make any attempt to realise during their 5 years in office, but we have to judge the amendment on its strengths and weaknesses and whether it is financially responsible. There is, I have to say, a conceit in parts of the SNP establishment today that we have heard in the chamber, and it's the conceit that the SNP agenda for local government is progressive, and indeed the conceit that their budget is balanced on the backs of progressive taxation, because what we know is that time and time again their budgets are balanced on the backs of Scotland's councils with real terms cuts, and real terms cuts that COSLA say is socially harmful. And there is just a sense that perhaps this amendment is about posturing when they choose to balance spending this year with deeper and crueler and more painful cuts in the year to come. This amendment isn't just spend now, cut later. It's spend now, cut deeper. It means rejecting the investment we're proposing today and eradicating our last layer of protection against SNP council funding cuts that we know are still to come with the unallocated service concession benefit. We have to manage the resources we can prudently and invest wisely, because the Scottish Government's medium-term financial strategy sets out a future for local government, and what that future holds for us is something that if something doesn't change, is real terms cuts, followed by real terms cuts, followed by real terms cuts. The rainy days are here and they are getting worse. That is why we have to manage our budget prudently. We all wish we could put forward a budget that delivers on all the spending priorities of all the parties, and we can't. And we discussed this a bit today. Why can we not do that? It's not just because of the costs of Brexit. It's not just because of the costs of the conflict in Ukraine, or the cost of inflation, or even just the costs of the autumn statement. But it's because Scotland's councils have been targeted for core funding cuts of almost 10% in real terms over a sustained period, even when, and this is the crucial point, even when the Scottish Bloc grant was rising. And those are not the findings of my group or any other group in this council, they are the findings of Audit Scotland. And I say to the SNP group here, if they want to champion investment in South Lanarkshire, then they need to start challenging, and I mean really challenging, their government. Stand up for local government, stand up for South Lanarkshire, stand up for yourselves, and understand that standing up for Scotland today means standing up to the SNP. And if you want to include in this budget measures that would make a difference to the people in our society we are here to help, then do not reduce it to tokenism and do not pay for it with cuts next year, because to answer the questions that were asked earlier, it says here in the SNP amendment in black and white, and John Ross confirmed it today, a recurring funding solution will require to be identified in relation to their cost of living initiatives. They are adding cuts to the cuts we face next year. You cannot pretend that this year is easy. You cannot pretend that things are forecast to get easier. It's there in your papers in black and white, page 27, Appendix 2, budget gaps of 16.8 million, 39 million and 20 million. And if we don't take the right decisions today, we add to the budget gaps in years to come. And I also want to draw the Council's attention to another item we will consider today. Page 83, paragraph 7.1, the SLLC board has estimated a budget gap of £4 million. And what we are proposing to do as an administration is not just contribute transitional support to help address that gap. We are also proposing a total transformation fund of £13 million by maximising the investment we can leverage out of this budget. If the SNP want to put forward a principled amendment to this council's budget, I suggest they go away and come back when they've got some principles, because this is an exercise in deflection, not decision. The administration position is stronger, it is credible, it confronts the challenges of the future, it does not duck them, and it invests wisely in South Lanarkshire. And that is why I ask the Council to back our budget, and let's get things done.
Okay, colleagues, I would like to thank everyone for their contribution this morning. We've heard passionate debate and we've had a good contribution from all parties regarding the amendments. I'm now going to ask the clerk to move to the vote, and Susan will take you through that.
Okay, just a reminder prior to the vote, and I'm aware that by the numbers, no one seems to be experiencing technical difficulties. We have the same number that started the meeting. So the motion is proposed by Councillor Fagan and seconded by Councillor Brown, and it is as per circulated. The amendment is by Councillor Ross and seconded by Councillor Chalmers, and also it has been circulated. Could I just ask that the officers bring up the voting motion versus amendment? Okay, I'm about to commence the vote.
First motion. How do you have it?
Just press it on your pad. I'm still waiting for 2 members to cast their vote. Oh, that's it. All members have cast their vote, so I'm about to close the votes. There were 34 in favour of the motion, 27 for the amendment and 1 abstention. I therefore declare that the motion is carried.
Okay, colleagues, if we can now move on to item 3 in the agenda, recommendations referred by the Executive Committee, Housing Revenue and Capital Account Budget 23-24, and those are pages 31 to 34 in your paperwork. Annette Finnan will speak to this.
Thank you, Provost. This report references the recommendations of the Executive Committee held on the 1st of February 2023 in relation to the Housing Revenue and Capital Account Budget, which was previously considered by Housing and Technical Resources Committee on the 23rd of January 2023. As in previous years, the proposed budget and rent increase for 2023-24 were developed closely with tenant representatives, taking full account of the pressures, challenges and priorities for the year ahead. At these previous 2 meetings, members were advised that the proposed revenue and capital budget for 23-24 had been prepared in line with the 30-year Housing Revenue Account business plan, reflecting the investment priorities while ensuring the revenue account remains in a stable financial position and rent levels remain affordable. Proposals were put forward for a 1-year rent increase of 3.5%, which equates to an average weekly increase of £2.67 and a capital programme of £63.9 million. This is in line with the commitment given by COSLA to keep the average local authority rent increases at or below an average of £5 per week. Members were advised of the full consultation process that took place, coordinated by the Budget Scrutiny Group, and of the feedback received. Overall support was received from tenants via the Budget Scrutiny Group and the Tenant Participation Coordination Group for the proposed 3.5% increase and for the investment priorities, with tenants stating that the proposed budget strikes a balance, allowing the Council to maintain investment in its stock and keep rents affordable. If I can take Council to the recommendations on page 31, the Council is asked to approve the recommendation that the recommendations from the Executive Committee on the 1st of February 2023 in relation to the Housing Revenue and Capital Account Budget for 23-24 be approved, including the proposed rent increase of 3.5% and the 2023-24 Housing Capital Programme totalling £63.916 million. Thank you, Provost.
Are there any questions or comments? Can we agree the report? Thank you. Can we now move on to item 4 in the agenda, the 23-24 Capital Programme Update, pages 35 to 48, and I'll invite Paul Manning to speak to this paper.
Thanks, Provost. So the first paper that you dealt with today was about the running costs for the Council. This is about the capital programme, and that's really how the Council invests in its assets and its infrastructure. So we did bring a report to the last Council which looked at how the Council puts together its capital programme, and it looked at some of the pressures that are there at the moment around capital expenditure. So following on from that, we've provided today a proposed capital programme for 2023-24. And what the paper goes through are really the building blocks that we've used to put that together. So if you'll indulge me, I'll take you quickly through those. They are summarised in the table that sits at the top of page 38. So the first thing that gets mentioned, and this is at the top of page 26, it talks about ongoing programmes of work. So again, you can see these covered in Appendix 1. These are the main things that represent the staples in the capital programme year in, year out. And if you have a look at Appendix 1, which I'm sure you have done, you'll understand why they're in there. 4.3 covers new priorities identified for 2023-24. This isn't a huge amount of money. It's £161,000, and what it looks to is investment in a new system for SLLC, and this is for booking and admission. And that's an essential in terms of that business moving forward. So that's why there's room found for that. 4.4 looks at the specific capital projects. Now, what you'll see, if you have a look at that section, is this is grant that's coming from the government for specific things. Main things that are picked out in there: vacant and derelict land, cycling, walking and safer routes. And it also mentions renewal of play parks and money for the expansion of free school meals. That's over £5 million that appears in there in respect of that. 4.6 looks to add in just under £27 million worth of city deal projects. So these have been ongoing for a period of years, and we're putting in place the money in terms of spend and funding to enable what needs to happen in year 2023-24. 4.7 brings us to Larkhall Leisure Centre. And what's acknowledged in there is additional external funding going into that of £2.2 million. There's background to that given at section 4.8, and 4.9 acknowledges the fact that due to the complex nature and scale of this build as a project, the expenditure is anticipated to cover several financial years. And what's said at the top of page 37 is that given the timescales involved in design and tendering, only an element of the budget will be required in 2023-24, and at this point we're looking to include £9 million. Now, as it says at 4.10, officers will continue to review the design for the proposed facility, projected costs and funding options. The point is made that a gap will remain, and it's significant. And the remainder of section 4.10 goes through the steps that would be taken to look to address that gap and the possible implications of those steps. 4.11 takes us to the next of the building blocks in this programme, and it's projects which are approved during previous financial years. So we look to bring in just under £7 million for those things. Those are covered in 4.11 through to 4.14. We've then got at 4.15 2022-23 movements. So as I come and report to you across the year through the Executive Committee, you'll be aware, and probably particularly so this year, there's money that we had to move out of year 2022-23 into year 2023-24. So this is us building those things into that 23-24 programme. What we do after that, this is at 4.16, it says 23-24 movements. We go through the programme at the beginning of the year and we try and identify things which we just don't think are going to spend in the coming year, and we look to move them on to future year capital programmes. So we are reducing the programme by £6.6 million in result of those things. So you've got this series of building blocks, and that takes me to the table, which appears at the top of page 38. The point that's picked up just before we leave page 37 at 4.17, in terms of a summary, and this is summarised in the table, it gives us a capital budget of £91.061 million. So that's summarised in the table, but the full list of projects coming to that value is detailed in Appendix 3. So you can see the individual projects that make that up on pages 43 and 44. You can, if I go to page 38, you can see that table summarised there, and then underneath that in section 5 there is a summary of the funding that's available. So it just gives, as is proper practice in this circumstance, a summary of where the funding is coming from. In terms of recommendations, Provost, if I go back to 2.1 and recommendation 1, it is that the 23-24 capital programme totalling just over £91 million, detailed in Appendix 3, be approved. And again, Provost, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, happy to take questions on this. Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Provost. I was pleased that Paul gave a full background to the Larkhall Leisure Facility. It's something that our group expect and want and expect to go forward. But you've highlighted issues there, and I think we really do need to challenge officers to identify external funding wherever they can and leave no stone unturned. Because simply having it there with an inadequate budget does not take the project forward, and that is what we would be looking for. So whether it's external funding or ensuring that any assets we sell are at full market price, all become very important. and encourages to do so.
Thank you. If you can bear with us, Paul, I'll take all of the questions and then perhaps you can address any answers that are required. Councillor Ross-Clarke.
Thank you, Provost. On a similar note, page 36, Larkhall Leisure Centre. How do we see the future of, or the near future, including that, of material prices affecting the cost of the project? So I'm struggling to see the next steps for Larkhall. I know we're going to continue looking at external funding, but I'm struggling to see, the next steps to get a leisure centre that, we deserve, that meets all the community's needs and wants. I don't want us to have to cut back on anything, because people are getting understandably impatient and they want confidence that we will get a proper leisure centre that lasts. Thank you.
I'll give Paul a chance to answer those first two points that have been made by Councillor Allison and Councillor Ross-Clarke. Sorry. There's that many names flashing up here. When it's working, it's good. It's to deal with the old provost to get it going right. So, Paul, would you like to respond to those?
That, right? It's all right. Sorry, Provost, I forgot to press my button there. Right. See, if I can come to Councillor Allison's point first, I don't know that Councillor Allison was asking a question so much as, giving encouragement to officers to pick up the actions that are outlined there at 4.10 in terms of leaving no stone unturned, right? And obviously, I speak on behalf of the corporate management team and telling you can rest assured that that will be done. If I can pick up Councillor Clarke's point around, I think you referred first of all to commodity prices. You referred as well to a route forward. The route forward is, as I've outlined, at 4.10, right? So I've been as open as you would expect me to be in putting that together. In terms of things like commodity prices, I can't sit and tell you I have foresight of what's going to happen there. You will hear various different accounts around how these things are likely to move, right? But it's difficult in a climate like this, when you've seen and experienced inflation, to see how it then works its way back out of prices. This will be one that will need to unwind over a period of time. A point that I would make is that as part of the design work that's underway, that is consciously addressing how the project can be de-risked, right? To get to a point where we've got greater certainty about elements like this and about things like ground conditions. Right, so that is something that's actively being done at this point in time. So hopefully that can, I'm not suggesting allay your fears, but just give you a wee bit more clarity as to how we're going to work forward with this, Councillor.
Okay. In regard to pressing buttons, in the past, Councillor Allison used to press the buttons of one or two people in the front row when he mentioned bridge. I'll just say the word cemetery, and I'm sure that presses one or two buttons again. Can I move on now to Councillor Razak?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, can I thank Paul for putting the work together for the budget, because I think it must have been a very, very difficult task, and it's getting harder every year. After some of the concerns are raised about the Sheila Montrose House, I started looking at the capital projects, and Larkhall Leisure Centre did come up as a question about Larkhall Leisure Centre. The cost of the build has been increasing. Have we had independent advice on this matter, on the build itself? Have we spoken to industry that have experience in building this as well? That's the second one. Third one is, have we spoken to other local authorities that have built these leisure centres? And the reason I'm saying this is that we're going to be spending a lot of money, and always the prudent way of spending a lot of money is do your homework first and look at projects everybody else is doing and see what the good practice and bad practice has been, and also don't replicate the mistakes other people make. So that's the reason for it. I think I'm concerned about the estimates that are coming through, and I'm just puzzled since other projects in other areas have been cheaper. So that's my question. Thank you very much.
Paul.
Right, listen, thanks, Provost. In terms of looking at the level of the projected budget, right, and obviously, you know, that is a pattern of increase. This has been benchmarked against national comparators and also construction industry rates that are available, right? So, you know, prices of commodities, construction inflation that are existing in the wider market are having an impact here. We can track these through these comparators, and what is being exhibited in the prices that are being discussed around potential designs, this is not out of kilter, right, with what those wider comparators would indicate. There is another aspect in this, and this is about changes in environmental and emissions targets, standards, regulations moving forward. So again, that has an upward impact on the price that will end up being quoted for this as a project. But I would go back to the point I made earlier on. Wherever possible through design work, we'll look to try and eliminate the risk that exists within this project, right, and get to firmer prices as time goes by. But hopefully I've given just a bit of background around why this is emerging.
Thank you. Councillor Ross Lambie.
Thanks, Provost, and again, thanks to Paul for his hard work on these papers. I'm very pleased to see the ambition for our capital expenditure outlined so clearly. It's really good, and it's good to see funding streams from across the UK, including the City deal, which is across, you know, nation funding, getting focused at a local level, which is really good. I'm kind of focusing today on the other end of the spectrum, where we dispose on our capital assets when we get rid of some of our big kind of assets that we have in the council. I've got a slightly growing concern about the processes and the transparency of how we go about that. And I'm predominantly referring to Montrose House, which we sold off for £250,000 this year, which worked out about just over £3 a square foot, which, to put it in perspective, is about the same price as carpet tiles from B&Q. It just struck me as not being the best value for money that we've got from our prize asset in the centre of Hamilton. And the fact there was only one offer taken, and there was no external third-party evaluation done. So I guess I'm really just seeking a little bit of reassurance that we've got a sufficiently rigorous and transparent process. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll take Councillor Richard Nelson before I ask Paul to respond.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, I've just parked in Larkhall Leisure Centre, which you'll be shocked to hear, I suppose. I think for me it's great to hear, and I would like to thank the Council Leader Joe Fagan this week for some of the work that he was doing after I chapped his door. Rather than play political games, I was actually looking forward and thinking about our constituents, especially in Larkhall, and to David Booth as well for making some phone calls in regards to trying to get Larkhall Leisure Centre over the line. For me, it's about consultation. We need to go back out and consult with the local community. There is a plan there that none of us, as a local elected members, have put any advice into, and I'm shocked when I got that piece of information. But all I'm asking is that we consult with the local community, but first of all, consult with elected members who are elected to represent the people of Larkhall, and I'd like to take that forward. Provost, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Nelson. John Anderson.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering why there's nothing in this capital budget for the replacement of Our Lady of Lourdes School. which I believe, I know there is a paper coming to executive next week, but does that mean we're not going to be spending any money in 23-24 in early Derler School? Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Listen, thanks, Provost. If I can just, I'll take the points, I think, in order, right, in terms of questions that were being asked. So around sale of assets, as you would imagine, right, given the nature of that and given the profile of it, that is a transaction in an area, and by that I mean a type of business that the council does that comes under a tremendous amount of scrutiny. And I can give categoric assurance that the process that the council follows is transparent and rigorous. So in terms of the example that was being quoted in Montrose House, that culminated in a committee report that came to the Housing and Technical Resources Committee on the 14th of December last year. So that lays out the process and it lays out how the eventual offer materialised and was accepted, and it gives a value there. A point I would make around this, these things are worth what someone will pay, right? And that is what emerged through that process and what was reported. It might not be as much as either yourselves or myself would want it to be, but there's a process that's followed, that amount's identified and the transaction takes place as a consequence. So there's an imperative for the council to sell what's going to be a vacant property as opposed to continuing to accrue costs, keeping an empty building. And that's the process through which that sale and the amount that the council got was identified. So that's hopefully addresses concerns around that. If people have more specific issues, I would be happy to discuss them, right, and look to address concerns that folk have around that. Coming back to Our Lady of Lourdes School, that is a project which is related to City Deal, right? So you've got a figure going in there of £26.9 million, and also Our Lady of Lourdes will be part funded by developer contribution as well. So through that report and through those entries that appear in the programme, that's how that expenditure will be brought into the programme and monitored, Councillor.
Yep. I think I'll just... Can we agree the report, colleagues? Thank you. Can we move on now to the item 5 on the agenda, Prudential Indicators, Treasury Management Strategy and Annual Investment Strategy for 23-24, and those are on page 49 to 80 of your paperwork. Paul Manning.
Okay, so this is a report that we bring to this council every year, and as the name would suggest, it maps these things out for the council for the coming year, sets the indicators and outlines the strategies for treasury management and the annual investment strategy. So these things get reported on throughout the year, and we come back and let you know how this has progressed. There's a couple of things I would just draw your attention to, which appear at the beginning of the paper. At a meeting of the council in September, there was a motion passed which asked for the council to demonstrate its own climate leadership through its investment strategy, and you can see those points picked out there at the bottom of page 49. And also, the paper covers the changes that we proposed in terms of our investment strategy around service concessions, and that's picked out at section 3.4. So the remainder of the paper, section 4 looks at the Prudential Code indicators. They're covered in Appendix 1. As it says at 4.6, through those indicators we lay out what our expectations are for the coming year and setting limits based on those expectations. Section 5 covers the Treasury Management Strategy. That's in Appendix 2, and the main things covered by that are at 5.2 at the foot of page 51. Debt and investment projections, expected movement in interest rates, borrowing strategies and statutory repayment of loans fund advances. And then at section 6, we give an overview of the annual investment strategy. That's covered in Appendix 3. Just at sections 6.7 and 6.8, the Council is required to set out in the strategy the types of investments that it will permit in the year. So those are permitted investments. That's covered in there. And again, at 6.8, the comments made that after consideration of the Council's requirements to manage funds and our approach to risk, we're not making any changes to the permitted investments previously agreed for 2022-23. So that gives you an idea of how that's developed across the past year. So Provost, if I go back to the recommendations, it looks for approval of the Prudential Code indicators, that the Treasury Management Strategy is approved and that the annual investment strategy is approved as well. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you. Can we agree the report? Thank you. Can we move on to item 6 on the agenda, South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture Concession Recommendations for 23-24, pages 81 to 84, and I'm going to ask David Booth to speak on this.
Thank you very much, Provost. The report is to present the recommendations for amending the concessionary rates for South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture Services. In terms of the background, I won't go into any detail in the background, as I think it's well documented that South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture, like all leisure trusts and cultural trusts across Scotland, are facing similar pressures to councils, both in terms of their ability to generate income post-COVID and the extraordinary financial pressures due to inflation rates and other paying utility contracts. In June 2021, the Council agreed that South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture's Board could set its commercial prices, but that the Council would retain the decision-making on its concessionary prices, which this report covers. South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture have a projected £4 million a budget gap for 2023-23, and the Board agreed on the 1st of February to increase its commercial prices by 7% across most of its services. The proposals within this paper, which relate to the concessionary prices, if accepted, would realise an additional £616,000, which would contribute towards that reducing that budget gap to by that amount. If this is not agreed, then the SLLC Board would require to consider further service reductions commensurate with the amount of money within this report. Moving to the concessions themselves, the proposals are that for, in section 4 of the report, the under-16s club discount, that would move from a 75% discount to a 50% discount, which is in line with other clubs in other local authority areas in the surrounding area, and if accepted would generate £476,000 of additional income to SLLC. In terms of the general concessions, this is split into two. There's general leisure concessions, which are currently at 50%, whereas the discount offered an average is between 15% and 40% across other local authority areas. The proposal, therefore, is to amend this rate to a discount of 25% of the adult rate, which would give an additional £90,000 of additional income to SLLC. 4.6 of the report outlines hall lets. South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture currently offer 75% discount for community and junior rate to pre-5 and over 60 groups, and it is recommended this down is amended to 50% in line with the change to the leisure discount for clubs, generating an additional £50,000 of income. If approved in terms of next steps, the implementation of the new concessionary rates would commence on the 1st of April 2023. And 5.2 outlines that the Board of SLC is due to take a meeting to take place on 22nd of February, which is today. However, that meeting has posted the issue of this paper has now moved to the 1st of March, following this full council meeting. In terms of, as I've outlined, the budget gap for SLLC is £4 million for 2023-24. The Board has a legal duty to set a balanced budget and has agreed its commercial prices, which would reduce that £4 million gap by £819,000. If this recommendations are accepted within this report, it again reduces that budget gap by a further £616,000, and Council will be aware of the agreement made earlier during this meeting of further support, which would help towards further reducing the budget gap of £4 million. With that, I'll refer back to section 2 of the report, which are recommendations. And the recommendations are that for the individual concession for SLC members be amended from 50% to 25% of the adult rate, that the additional under-16s club discount, which is currently 75% of the adult rate, reverts to 50%, and that the halls under 5s and over 60s group discount goes to 75%, goes from 75% of the full rate to 50%. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Thanks, Chair. I think David alluded to earlier that the additional money going into SLLC, there might not be a need for this for them to balance their budget. So should we actually be taking this just now, or should we wait until after SLLC have a meeting to see if they still require this to be taken? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Anderson. We would require a decision to be made on this paper just now, because that would then set, with this paper, with the decisions that have been made in terms of commercial pricing, and with the decisions being made earlier in this meeting, it then identifies the amount of money that SLLC would need to consider for bridging that gap for 2023-24. Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Provost. Page 83, 7.1, financial implications, states that there's a budget gap of, just lost my computer, sorry, 4 million for 2023-24, arising from exceptional inflation, rises in costs related to pay increase, the impact of COVID pandemic and the subsequent cost of living crisis, etc., etc. I think my question is, does that cost include the money that's going to be lost to an industrial tribunal loss that the Trust were advised not to go down a course of action, but subsequently, after the intervention of council officers and the previous leadership of the council, Councillor Ross, Chalmers and Craig, decided to go against the advice of the Trust lawyers and pursued a course of action. That case has been lost. We're waiting in the remedy hearing. I estimate, although I can't get exact figures just now because the Trust will not release them, the legal costs are at least £1,000. I've had to go to the Information Commissioner because Trust won't release them. And we've still to get the remedy hearing to find out how much the Trust Oblique Council is going to lose because of poor decision making taken 3-4 years ago. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Geraldine, can I call you in, please?
Thank you, Provost. This is not a matter for the Council because it's a matter for an independent body, so the Council is unable to comment in any employment tribunal case involving an independent body. Okay.
This is what the Council hides behind all the time. It was the Council that took the decision to enforce the Trust to take part in this.
Councillor Watson, could you pause for a minute, please? The Chief Executive wishes to contribute.
Provost, I need to intervene. This is an ongoing legal process. It involves another organisation. It may not be debated in public to this extent. I need to advise Council this debate on this point needs to stop now.
Papers are in the public domain. The Council took a slaughtering.
The legal process is not complete.
The legal process is not complete, and I'm not going to allow any further debate on this point at the moment. Thank you. Can I move on to Councillor Allison?
Thanks. Again, it's the financial implications at point 7. If my maths are right, the money that's highlighted there, plus £1.5 that we've agreed in our budget, still leaves a deficit of £1 million for the Leisure Trust. I am led to believe letters or emails went out to staff some of their staff indicating that the premises that they operated in were going to be closed on the 31st of March. Can we have an assurance that that will not happen? That if there needs to be rationalisation, that local groups have the opportunity to be able to perhaps come in and save the day, if you like, before these assets are shut, and it's not simply fait accompli. And second, and what should have been first, did these letters go out before the reduced budget gap was identified by the Leisure Trust, or was they working on the £4 million deficit?
David Booth.
Thank you very much, Provost. Thank you very much, Councillor Allison. In terms, I don't know about the specifics around those emails that went out. They'll have went out from South Lanarkshire Leisure Culture, not from the council. What I can say is that the budget gap, as it currently sits at the moment, is for £4 million, and if a decision is made on this paper and the decision that was made in the paper earlier, along with the decision made about increasing the commercial prices, goes a long way to bridging that funding gap. However, it still leaves a residual gap of around about £1 million. South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture, at its board meeting on the 1st of March, will need to consider how it addresses that, and that will be through potential a mix of options that are available to them in terms of service reduction. But it may also include some decisions about rationalisation, which will explain why staff will have been advised in a general sense that some of these decisions are coming their way.
Councillor Allison.
Yeah, David, but can we have, well, first of all, can you confirm whether the Leisure Trust has the authority to close facilities or not? And secondly, can we have an assurance about how we are going to take these forward to protect our local communities, many of them feel are vital assets?
David, do you wish to respond to that?
Thank you very much, Provost. Thank you very much again, Councillor Allison. So the lease arrangements we have with South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture, they would need to identify whether, with the amount of money that they have got available to them, they're able to continue to operate in all the facilities that are currently within the lease arrangement. If they are unable to do that, then they would be referring back to the council and advising that their facilities that they would not be able to run. It's then up to the council to make a final decision in terms of what happens to those facilities.
Sorry, so where does that go to? Sorry for continuing this, David, but where does that go to? When will we find out if that's going to be what's happening? And what committee will then have to decide how we take that situation forward?
So at the board meeting of SLLC, which will take place on the 1st of March, proposal will be put forward to the board from SLLC in terms of meeting the remainder of that funding gap. And that may include what happens to some properties. If that decision is agreed at that board meeting, then the SLLC will then advise the council that they would not be in a position to provide services from whatever facilities that may be in question. It would be then for the council then to decide what happens to those facilities and whether those facilities would continue to operate by some other means. But the situation as it stands at the moment is that SLLC and the board members of SLLC, in terms of their legal obligations, would not be able to continue to operate those facilities in the absence of a budget to do so. So they would come back to the council, but through some communication with the council that these facilities would not be able to be operated by SLLC into the forthcoming year, and then it would be for us for the council to make a decision in what happens to those facilities.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious that we're now at 12:30, and normally we would stop for a lunch break. However, we did have 3 breaks between 10 o'clock, and one of those was a substantial 15-minute break. and we had 2 shorter breaks, one of almost 10 minutes and then another 5-minute break. We have just one more councillor wishing to speak, and then we have a final item. So I propose to continue for a further 10 minutes, given that we've had those breaks, rather than asking members to leave and come back again in half an hour. So can I ask, can we agree that? Yes. Okay, Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Provost. Earlier in our budget proposals, we had put aside some money for SLLC, which we thought would cover the cost of the concessions. Can I ask if the money that's been put forward in the administration budget, if David knows whether that would cover the cost of the concessionary changes?
Thank you very much, Provost. Thank you very much, Councillor Ross. No, that money is separate from the money in this paper.
Thank you, David. I'm still minded. I just wish that the Council had accepted our budget proposals, but I would like to move an amendment that we keep the status quo and don't accept changes to the concessionary figures. Thank you very much.
Do you have a set?
I'll second, Provost.
Councillor Fagan.
If that's the case, then I will move the paper as is, without going into any great detail, because it was discussed at length during the budget process, and it has been discussed in advance, and people have had sight of the papers. The simple fact of the matter is there is a funding crisis in leisure and culture, and it is set out in stark terms in section 7 of this report. And we have to put the Leisure and Culture Board into a position. They are an independent and autonomous body, and we have to put them into a position where, although we cannot interfere in their decisions, that they have as robust a financial settlement as possible. And I have to say that includes giving them the flexibility that this paper asks us to provide them with. And I think it would be, frankly, irresponsible not to move the paper as is.
Do you have a seconder? I'll second it. Thank you. Councillor Razak.
Would the motion by, the amendment by Councillor Ross not leave us with a deficit budget?
It leaves the Leisure Trust with a deficit in their budget.
And how would that be funded?
Chief Executive.
Provost, just to be clear, if Council decides not to support the recommendation from the SLLC board, that will increase the budget gap that they'll have to deal with in the meeting on the 1st of March. And let's just be plain about it, because David's been really clear about the pressures they're facing. That would require them to identify a greater level of service cuts in order to bridge that gap.
Can I ask colleagues that are wishing to speak to be as brief as they can now to help us to remain within the time constraints that we have? Councillor Allison.
I was basically going to say what the Chief Executive said. Any time with a budget that we're looking at, and although it's not our budget, the Leisure Trust one, if you're looking to take money out, you should find another way of putting money in. And there's nothing in this proposal from John Ross that does that. Again, it's simply playing politics and not actually looking after our own constituents, because it will lead to more closures.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Just on that point, Alec, the new budget that was passed today was putting money into SLLC, so it would more than cover what is in this. I think it's important to remind ourselves that SLLC will need to rewrite their budget strategy after today's additional fund. So again, I think we should reject this now and then wait to see what they come up with at the 1st of March. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Nelson.
By the amendment from the SNP group, most of these halls could be in their areas and they're sitting there making cuts like this. God help the community if they get back into this administration, because what I've seen today is making a mockery of the whole situation. We need these halls, and I will back the amendment, the motion, sorry, that came from Councillor Fagan. I'm astounded, Provost, absolutely astounded.
Okay, we're moving into the element of the political comments now, and given our time constraints, I'm going to move to the vote. Councillor Watson, final comment.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not going to drift into the hearings, but at the end of the day, we've been told there's a £4 million budget gap. Does that include or not include the costs that are likely to be incurred through the hearings? Yes or no? Simple question.
Chief Executive.
Really simply, there is a £4 million projected budget gap in the annual operations of SLLC for 23-24. So that's their recurring revenue costs. Yep.
Okay. Right. I'm closing that debate now, and I'm going to ask Susan to move to the vote on this paper.
Okay, the motion in front of you is proposed by Councillor Fagan and seconded by Councillor Convery, and that's as per in your papers. The amendment by Councillor Ross, seconded by Councillor Chalmers, is that the status quo remains in terms of concessions for SLLC. I'm just about to open the vote, so could I ask you to make your voting option, please? Still waiting for one person to cast their vote. Still saying 61. 62. Oh. Okay, so as means. Okay, I'm about to stop the votes. Okay, there was 34 that voted for the motion, 27 for the amendment and 1 abstention. The motion is therefore declared carried.
Okay, moving on now to item 7 on the agenda, family leave for elected members. Councillor Hose, pages 85 and 86. Geraldine McCann.
Sorry.
Thank you, Provost. This report just notifies Council that Councillor Hose had applied for 2 weeks paternity leave under the family leave policy. So it's a retrospective report because Councillor Hose is here today. But it was following the birth of his baby daughter.
Okay, colleagues, we've reached the end of the... Councillor Dempsey.
Thank you, Provost. It's a really delicate one. I've got 2 points of order. They are, however, related to your own conduct, so I'd ask if you would possibly like to recuse the Chair to allow the Deputy Provost to rule.
On what basis would I do that?
Because my points of order with regards to your own conduct.
Well, I'm quite capable of
Okay, that's fine.
personally.
So the first one is whether it's appropriate or a breach of the ethical standards for a member of this chamber to insinuate that another elected representative in another chamber is a criminal, that is wearing black and white striped jumper. And my second point of order is whether it's appropriate or indeed an ethical standards breach for you, both as chair and provost, while sitting in the chair and wearing our council's civic chain of office to make political points. I do take that you said you're making them as the leader of the so-called independent group, but you were wearing the chain and sitting in the chair. So I would just like to see whether you would like to retract those comments.
Geraldine, would you like to respond, please?
There is a process set out by the Code of Conduct if you wish to submit a complaint concerning the first matter to the Commissioner for Ethical Standards. I can supply you with the contact details, and it's an online form that would need to be filled in. With regard to the second matter, the provost does wear two hats. She is the provost and as such chairs this committee, but she's also the chair of the independent group, the convener of the independent group. She quite clearly stated that when she was making her comments with regard to the budget proposals, that she was doing so as the leader of the independent group. So she did indicate to Council in advance that she was going to do that, which was appropriate for her to do. Given the comments were relatively short, it would have been inappropriate to remove herself from the chair into the body of the room, because that would have disrupted the body of the council, the work of the council. So therefore, you can, if you wish, still make a complaint to ethical standards about that, but I think it was appropriate, given the circumstances of the meeting, to do so. I should say that was my comments as Council Monitoring Officer.
Thank you. I thank you for your comments. So my point would just be whether the chair wants to rule that you agree with those comments. That is your decision. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you.
I'm going to end the meeting now. Thank you so much, colleagues, for all your contributions this morning.